So as well as being used as a data source, JSON has become a popular data format for transmitting data from a web service. It's more lightweight than XML, it's human readable, and it's easy to parse and use. In this example, we'll be using a news API to create a small news app. The API we are using is a free API, and you can get an API key at the link. And it returns JSON metadata for the headlines currently published on a range of news sources and blogs. So if you want to recreate this yourself, you'll just need to go and sign up for an API key that you can then use in the stack. Okay, so I've set up a very simple UI for our app here. So this is just a header bar. This is a data grid that we'll use to display the list of news articles. These are our news sources. I've chosen BBC, CNN, and The Verge. The API actually has, I think, 17 different news sources that you can use, but I've just chosen 3 here. And then we've got a second card, which just has a browser and a header bar with the ability to go back, and this card will be used to display the full content of an article. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to load our articles. So again, we'll do this on the card script here, and on pre-open card, we'll call load articles. And then we'll have our load articles command down here. Now, in the previous example, the first thing we had to do was get the path to our JSON file. In this case, the first thing we need to do is get the path to the web API URL. So we'll build it up. So we put the base URL. So it's https newsapi.org/v1/articles. And then the source. And at this point we need to pass the source that we want, which will be whichever of these buttons is highlighted here, so BBC News, CNN, or The Verge. So just to quickly show you actually, the names of these buttons, so this is BBC-News, this is CNN, and this is the -Verge. So these are the same as the name of the source that you have to pass in here. So all we need to do here is get the highlighted button name of this group of sources. So this is actually a group. So these are radio buttons that I've put icons on. So by creating radio buttons and giving them an icon and a highlight icon, then you don't need to do anything else. By grouping together radio buttons, it'll always automatically ensure that only one of them is highlighted at a time, and it'll unhighlight the others, and then you can just get the highlighted button name, which will return the name of the highlighted button in the group. So here we do source equals, and then we have the highlighted button name of group sources. And then we also have to pass the API key, so it's API key equals, and then I've got it stored in a custom property of my stack, so and the C API key of this stack. And we'll put that all into our TURL variable. So I've put my API key in a custom property of the stack. This is actually the only place where I'll be calling it, but if you were calling the API in multiple different places, it'd be useful just to have it in one place that you would only need to update in one place, one time, if you need to make any changes to it. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to get that URL to get back our JSON data. So another variable here, and this time we'll put URL TURL into tJSON. So this is just like what we did with the file, but in this case we're getting it from a web service, and then again we will convert it into an array. And that will give us back an array, and the array has an element called articles, and in that element there are all the information about the articles from that particular news source. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to set the DG data of group article list, which is the name of our data grid, to T array articles. So the information that comes back in the JSON, there's quite a lot of information in there, but what we want to do is we just want to display the list of articles. So we get the articles key, and that is numerically keyed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is what a data grid needs. And just to quickly show you how I've set up the data grid, so it's a data grid form. So if we have a look at the row template here, you'll see that it has an image called thumbnail, a field called title, and another field called description. And if we have a look at the script for the data grid, on fill in data, we set the text of field title to pDataArrayTitle, same for description, and we set the file name of the thumbnail image to the URL to image that's passed in from the API. And that's all we need to do in there. I haven't set up any code for resizing it or anything, so all we're doing in this particular case is filling in the data with the relevant elements from the array. Okay, so now if we call pre-open card, we should see a list of articles. And there's our list of articles, so something about the Justice League, Netflix, drones. So these are the most recent articles from this source. So it's The Verge that we have selected at the moment. And just to show you again, we'll have a look at what all the information that's passed, that's given to us from the API is. So if I put a breakpoint here, and then call pre-open card again, we can have a look at the array. It's a bit easier to look at the array than to look directly at the JSON data. So you'll see there's a sub-array there, articles, and it tells us what the source was, the status, and sort by. And if we have a look in the articles, as we said, they're numerically keyed. So if we look at article number 1, we've got the author, the description, published at, so that's a published date, so you could include that if you wanted to, the title, the URL, which is the actual URL to the full article, which we will be using in a second, and the URL to the image, which is what we're using as our thumbnail here. So I've chosen just to show the thumbnail, the title, and the description, but you could change that to include as much information as you want. And we've chosen just to use the articles element here, and we've not done anything with these ones, but this is all the information that is passed back by the API. Now we also want our user to be able to switch between the data sources. So we will select our sources group, and we'll add some code here. So we'll say on mouse up, and all we have to call here is load articles, because the load articles command actually uses the highlighted button name of the group, and as I mentioned, because they're radio buttons, they will automatically highlight. So all we need to do is tell it to refresh itself by loading the articles again, and it will pick up the selected source from our group. So we can test that out, so we can see what the top articles from the BBC News are. So here are the top BBC articles. We can then choose CNN and see what CNN articles are. And we can go back to The Verge. So as I said, there's more sources that you can use. I just chose these 3 to show how we can switch between them. Now, of course, people will also probably want to be able to read the full article, not just have a look at the title here. So what we want to do is when the user selects an article here, it'll move to our second card, the one with the browser on it, and it will display the full text of the article. So we'll select our article list, open up the code for that, and again we'll handle mouse up, which is what we get when the user selects a row in a data grid. So the first thing we need to do is we need to find out which row they highlighted. So to do that, we get the DG highlighted line of the data grid group. So that'll give us the line number of the highlighted article. Then we get the data array associated with that particular line. So we get our article data. So we get the DG data of line. And then of our highlighted line, so of T highlighted line. And we'll put that into our array. So it's a group article list into our T article data variable. And what we can then do is we can get the article URL, because if you remember when we first looked at the article data that we received from the API, one of the elements was the URL to the actual article. So we'll set the C article URL. So set a custom property on our second stack, which is card article 2, and it'll be T article data, and it's called URL. So that is the URL to the full article. So you remember that just because I'm not actually displaying the article URL anywhere in the data grid row, that doesn't mean that information's been lost. All that information is still associated with each row in the data grid, so you can still access it like this. You don't have to put everything into fields or anything like that. That data will be preserved. So we've set the C article URL of our card. So now what we want to do is we want to go to that card, and we'll use a visual effect push left fast just to get a nice effect. And then we'll go to card article. So now if I select one of these articles, so let's have a look at this one. Then when we go to the card, the browser is used to display the full article to the user. So there's a little bit of code in here already. So all we're doing is on OpenCard, we're setting the URL property of our browser widget to the C article URL of this card, and on close card we're clearing it. And the reason that we're doing it that way is just to get a slightly nicer effect for the user. We're doing it on OpenCard so that we move to the card first. So we move to the card and then we show the article. If we did it on pre-OpenCard, it would have to load and it would take longer to see the transition between the cards. And similarly, when we close card, we want to set the URL of the browser to empty, because that means that when we come back to the card, it'll already be empty, and then we can just load the article that we selected. If we left it set, we'd probably come back to the card, we'd briefly see the previous article, and then it would reload and show us the new one. But it's a slightly nicer effect if you're going from an empty browser to the article you want, rather than from the previous article back to this one. And then of course in our header bar we've got a little bit of code just to go back to the index card. In this case we're pushing right fast. So the whole thing, we can go back, we can change to the BBC News, so we can then choose the story that we're interested in. It'll take us to the browser card, then it will load up the new article, we can read it, and then we can go back to our list again. Okay, so that's our simple little news app using an API that provides JSON data. So you can see we've made a nice little news app here. There's not a lot of code in it, there's not a lot of work to be done, and there's lots and lots of different free APIs that you could use to either to implement a full app, kind of like we've done here, or just to use them as part of your app. So you might want to use news as part of your app just as an extra feature or something like that. You might want to do weather. You might be able, if we go back to some of the apps we've looked at previously, we had our movie database. You might be able to access, there's a few, I think, APIs that provide movie data, so you can just search for a title and then you can pull in things like the director and the cast list and things like that. And you can pull that in from an API rather than having to implement that all yourself. So there's lots of ways that using web APIs can reduce your workload or allow you to add features to your apps, and using JSON is a really nice way of doing that because it's so simple to use and it's easy to read. You can look at the files, you can see exactly what is stored in there, and hopefully everybody will find that useful. So thanks very much, everybody.